Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today. Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the idea of that George Soros pushes about this open society and the idea that bad things such as totalitarianism can be prevented from happening ever again if certain measures and social engineering measures are taken. Now, the globalization sort of thing as we know it, or certainly it's being practiced and enforced without the consent of the people, is one of those wider schemes that we can create a virtual paradise. And that's very conditional. I'll come back in a moment. If we can remove nationalism, if we can remove borders, and if we can remove any sort of sense of historical or national identity, and also remove the will of the people as expressed through the ballot box, through voting. If we can remove those things, we can then usher in a new era where an effective imagined or alleged paradise will exist. Now, I guess we need to sort of just come back a bit because these attitudes and views and writings were formulated, particularly formulated by primarily the members of the Jewish diaspora during starting sort of around the mid-1930s, I guess, sort of 2 or 3 years or so after the Hitler had taken government in Germany, and had carried on through the 1930s and 40s and 50s, and indeed until the present day. Now, this idea of an open society in a world with no borders, these sorts of things, no nationalities, this is very much a gig of the Jewish diaspora. It's how can we create a world where the Jews will never again be persecuted or hounded or murdered in large numbers, or all of the above. How can we create that world? And the rise of the Nazis in Germany is seen as that's sort of the high point, if you like, of Jews being persecuted, the Jewish diaspora being persecuted. So let's take that as the high point, and let's then look at what we need to do to stop totalitarian governments from appearing. And so they've gone through rather like children of if we take away the bad things, then only the good things will remain, without realizing the effects of the vacuums in history and time that are created. So if you take out one thing, how do you know what replaces it? Won't be worse. And if you affect something and push it off, if the forces push something in one direction, I'm talking historical forces here, or social forces at the moment, then how do you know that won't lead to something infinitely worse, or something different, or a different outcome that may disadvantage your diaspora just as much as the one you're trying to run away from? Something I've learned in history is the harder you try to stop something from happening, and the more energy you put into it, the more you almost create a gravitational pull that ensures that you're trying to stop actually does happen. And it becomes like an inverse self-fulfilling type prophecy. And I'm not even sure I can adequately describe that, although I've observed that, in a number of times, whether it be, in my own life, observing things around. I remember a mother, a woman who'd had real drug problems when she was younger, and she was so fanatically desperate to prevent her daughter from going down the same path that she became quite irrational about it, and badgered and hectored and harassed the daughter to such an extent the daughter, I'm going to take drugs just to shit you. And that was, so it ended up having the reverse effect. And I remember this woman, who was only a few years younger than me, being absolutely devastated by this outcome, and given that she tried so hard, as she saw it, so hard to stop it from happening, that she ended up enabling it to happen. But coming back to the Jewish diaspora thing here, now they've looked at what caused in the Jewish context what caused Hitler to appear, because that's now Hitler now lurks in every shadow. Well, we see it today. You see the speech writers and the social media sort of commentators in the US that work for the Democrat politicians. They're, with rare exception, Jewish, and they manage to weave the sort of the implication of Hitler into almost every utterance they make, down to, so if parents complain about children, 5-year-old children being taught LGBT stuff at school, then it's Hitler. Hitler has arrived. It's Hitler. That's it. Nazis, neo-Nazis, fascists, and so on. So they can't get away from it. But if you look at their rationale, the Jewish thinkers, and I'm looking at a list here of the what's cited as the top thinkers who say democracy doesn't work, and it's tyranny of the majority, and with the democracy is built on any sort of national cohesion, as in race or any other forms, religion, these sorts of things. If it's built on any of that, then it's only one step away from the totalitarianism that brought Hitler in the Jewish sort of cognizance. Now, if you look at the top 10, 11, 12 most critical thinkers who criticise democracy and all that goes with it, whether it's proportional or Republican democracy or sheer majority, any of those forms, of those 12, 11 are Jewish. So I mean that can't be a coincidence. You could say if one was Jewish, okay, fine. 2 maybe. The Jews are overrepresented in these sorts of heavy lifting type intellectual pursuits. So 3 maybe, but 95% of that, I don't think so. So Jews have an inbuilt fear of democracy as it's expressed in the Western world, because it's built around things like nationalism and national identity, as the Jewish diaspora would see it, or their leading thinkers would see it, and therefore it's a threat, because it, as in their cognizance, it's only one step away from Hitler. So this is why the Hitler thing comes up. Now, to the Jewish thing is, how do we stop this form of democracy creating the conditions that lead to anti-Jewish sentiment? So now they have a variety of sort of views in it. If we take away national identity, if we take away Gentile history, and if we create, we remove all binding agents in that society, or all the binding agents, whether it be family, religion, or nationality, or whatever, all the binding agents are removed. And in addition to that, we make sure that the most marginalised, which is where this pursuit, comes from, the one-legged, black, lesbian, transgender, that we find the most marginalised people, and we invent new ones when we run out. The most marginalised people, they must be elevated to a status of equality plus. So we have to not only elevate their status, but the state has to intervene to actively prevent anything, any negative sentiment towards them. And if we can do those things, then we can create this free society where individual liberty exists. Now that's a huge stretch. So we have to take away the law. We have to have special laws for people. We have to remove due legal process. We have to deny the will of the people. We have to force propaganda on and so on. And that's what they're referring to as liberty. Not that it is liberty in the net sense of liberty, but it will create a greater liberty sometime down the track. But in reality, again, that's code for creating a society that can never victimize Jews again. That's really the code speak of the wider narrative here. And you see this whether it comes from George Soros or any of the international Jewish thinkers. You can even see the seeds of that in Marx on a class basis, rather than just pure individual basis. Now, we need to look at just in, why did the Nazis come to power? Was it the failings of democracy? Was it as the Jewish activists would see it? Was it some inevitable outcome of the democratic process, or was it an inevitable outcome of nationalism or anything like that? I don't believe it was any of those things, and as they appear to be, if the Jewish activists and thinkers are reading it that way, I think they've rather missed the point. Now, in some ways, the Jewish thinkers say, well, there's no grand sweep of history. We can't look at history and see that history repeats itself. We can't see history in that way. We have to see history in the circumstances of the times, which is a reasonable point. But then they flip over and use this. So, well, we should have seen Hitler coming because totalitarianism is something that reoccurs on the grand sweep of history. Therefore, we can rely on history. So they contradict themselves quite a lot, actually. And it's clear that an argument is being made to suit the agenda rather than be attempt to be accurate or rely on information that would in balance of probability reoccur with some sort of reliability. But the experience in Central Europe was unique for the times, and there were many sort of things that happened that twists and turns that could have stopped Hitler from coming to power. But we need to look at those. Firstly, Germany was not militarily defeated in World War One. It was a very close run thing, World War One, and it was only the arrival of the Americans in 1917 and then the arrival of American troops in substantial numbers that enabled the non-German side to prevail. And again, it was a close-run thing. But the other powers of Europe, particularly the French and the British, were terrified of how close it had been. And to the French, it was reimagining their 1871 defeat to the Germans, or the Prussians as they then were. This was just immediately before Germany federated, and which was as much due to French incompetence as the German railways that delivered troops to the front in a quicker time than the French thought was possible. But nonetheless, the French were terrified that they couldn't sustain another war. Germany had a population sort of almost double that of France, and when the German military was more effective than the French or the British military, and by a good 20 to 25%, if not closer to a third, and they couldn't sustain another war. It's also believed that the French people wouldn't have the stomach for another conflict of anything resembling or approximating that level of intensity. So the conditions in Germany were a very harsh peace was imposed on Germany, and to do with reparations and so on. Germany lost sections of territory that had coal mines and iron ore mines, so they lost quite a few raw materials and so on. So it was a tough time for Germany. The German economy had lost quite a lot of international markets for their finished engineered goods, which were of a high quality. So anyway, the Germany was doing it pretty tough. Now there was a sense of the humiliating peace created a sense of annoyance and shame in Germany that we weren't really beaten. Why were we being treated so harshly just because the war was a close run thing and we nearly won it? That shouldn't in itself be a reason why we have to be subject to humiliating peace, such as if when they fell behind in reparations payments, French troops occupied the mining areas of the Ruhr Valley in Western Germany and so on. So Now, on top of that, the hardship, which was felt in different parts of Europe, it wasn't just in Germany, that the hardship that was felt meant that a lot of Germans were starving on the street and dying, and there were communist insurrections and attempts at communist coup d'etats, and there were communist mobs roaming the streets with the state so enfeebled that it was almost unable to oppose it. And there was a breakdown of law and order and these sorts of things. So it was a stark contrast to Germany sort of before the war. They had a democracy imposed on that was very dysfunctional and was doomed, I think, to fail anyway, regardless. And so there was rampant inflation. Some of that was induced in order for the Germans to be able to pay the reparations in these ridiculously inflated currencies. So some of that was induced because of that, where the inflation rate was calculated by the hour in some cases. It was that substantial. Now, while Germany was prostrate and in a difficult sort of position, not all, but nearly all the communist insurrections and socialist uprisings and these sort of things were led by and supported by Jew activists, communist activist Jews, and that wasn't lost on the, that came across loud and clear. Whether it be the Spartacist uprising, which was led in part by, or the co-leader was a Jewish lesbian school teacher, for goodness sakes. There's a shot for you. And today she'd be president of the American Teachers Union or something. The Jewish sort of presence there was huge, and in those communist uprisings, and also in the Jews buying up German businesses at bargain basement prices because they were going broke and this sort of stuff. This all left a bad taste in everyone's mouth. But then because the communist goons were roaming the streets, the only people who were prepared to oppose them, and with a counter squad of goons, so there's a lot of goons running around the streets having these running battles and shooting each other and beating each other up, stabbing each other and so on. I mean, it was mayhem. But the only people prepared to oppose the communists were the National Socialist Workers' Party, which was later on became known as the Nazi Party. But they when the Americans realised that the Germans just couldn't pay those punitive sort of reparations, they decided to reinvigorate the German economy. And I think it was like 1926, 1927, around there, and things did improve. And as the economy improved, the Nazis didn't do so good in the vote. They were still the largest party, but they weren't doing as good. And no other party would ally with them. So Hitler was viewed as a working class guy, and so that nobody wanted to go into a coalition with Hitler. But in order to form a majority government back in the day, 53%, you had to have a coalition, and this was where the aristocratic parties all got together. And the reason sort of Hitler was shunned was not so much because of the politics or the policies, but rather he was viewed as a lower working class guy, and that politics was the domain of the aristocrats, and always had been. So then whilst being the majority party, you have to remember the Nazis emphasising, hey, we're all German citizens here. Let's stop fighting amongst ourselves and look out for each other. And this was something that today would be viewed as that, oh fuck, that is straight out of Hitler's playbook. That's fascism. That's Nazism, and that means persecution of the Jews. And this is very much this ghost, just leers up in the mind of the Jewish activists today, and I believe, and so they tend to see anything like this as being, well, that's Hitler, and if anyone that opposes mass migration, Hitler, because mass migration dilutes nationalism. Anyone that wants to stop the dilution of nationalism must therefore be a fucking Nazi, if not Hitler personally. So there's this strange connection between unrelated events, because again, as the Jewish activists see it, you want to have a national identity. Hitler, that's it, Hitler. And so they jump straight from the chocolate bar straight to Hitler. It's a fucking leap of faith of the first magnitude, but it's how they're thinking, and it's how the Soros, open society, and how those around him and those other people, they sort of seem to have that view as well, that diluting national identity in the West is absolutely essential to creating a sort of society that will never again persecute Jews as they would perceive it. Now, I notice in the societies that murdered millions upon millions of people, like Mao's China or Pol Pot's Cambodia, they didn't murder Jews because there were no Jews there to murder. So they sort of get a free pass. Now, if you want to murder Gentiles or someone else, that's okay. Hey, we don't care. That's all right. But if you start murdering Jews, then we have to work out how we can stop that. The great atrocities of the 20th century, like Hitler comes in the overall scheme of things. Hitler's actually a bit down the list. In the overall scheme of things, the murderous regimes of the Stalin's Soviet Union, again, China and Cambodia and so on. These rank as pretty serious contenders for the first prize, but they don't really get a mention. Now, the Bolsheviks in the Soviet Union or Russia, they seized power through revolution. Pretty much Mao's sort of folks did as well in China. Same with Pol Pot in Cambodia, the violent revolution. So the enemy that the Jews see isn't the Jewish activists see it. It's not revolution and so on. But they don't seem to have a problem with it, strangely. They seem to have a problem with a democratic liberal democracy type scenario that ultimately leads to, or as they would see it, creates a clear path to the totalitarianism that produced Hitler. And this is a rather strange thing. Wouldn't armed revolution be the most dangerous thing? Maybe not. So they're in their cognizance that the rise of Hitler is the object lesson. People had the right to vote in Germany. The Nazi Party was the biggest party, and therefore these things are dangerous to, Hitler emphasized that the German people, the German citizenship, German nationality, German history as a way of bringing a very divided country together and make it cohesive. So really the Nazis' policies were pretty specific at the time for achieving a purpose, national unity. Did that mean, was that a direct path to Jewish persecution? Well, no, it wasn't. The Nazis and many Germans at the time saw, well, hold on a minute, we've had 100, I'll use a round number here, we've had 100 socialist communist uprisings, attempted coup d'etats. It's like an armed takeover of the government, by the way. And they've all been headed by Jewish people. So wow, the peoples on the street corner sprouting Marxism and the workers revolt and rise up and so on, like this, they've all been Jewish. Maybe not every single one of them, but certainly. Now, given that the Jewish population of Germany at the time, the adult population was 200,000 or something at the time, adults, then it seemed that every Jewish adult was either buying up Gentile businesses at bargain basement prices or was attempting to foment revolution. Now, that had a deep effect on the psyche at the time. And other things like in France, the government of the socialist Jewish government of Leon Blum and other stuff around Europe. This was seen with some alarm in some quarters. So the forces that created Hitler and created that scenario and those circumstances were very much specific to the time. The Bolshevik Revolution was seen as a Jewish gig primarily, which is a bit of an overrepresentation. You know, some of the people then weren't Jewish. You know, Bukharin and Lenin and so on, they weren't Jewish. But this was the Nazis came up because the Wall Street crash came along, and then gave. And there's a lot of hardship in Germany, and Hitler was saying, "Well, I'll fix this," and so and it was only with much reluctance, and given that the communist street gangs, again primarily led by Jews, were running around creating all sorts of mayhem on the street, and so Hitler said, "Well, I'll stop this," and so he was appointed Chancellor in January 1933, very reluctantly, the president of the German, the Weimar Republic, as it was called. The president didn't want to put Hitler in at all. You know, he referred to him as that Bohemian corporal, because Hitler had been a corporal in the army. And if Hitler hadn't had the Iron Cross for bravery that he got in World War I don't think he'd have got there either. That was the only thing that gave him even a shred of credibility with the aristocratic classes. And then the Nazi government of the 11 senior ministries, only 2 were Nazis. That's Hitler and Minister for East Prussia, which was Hermann Goering. The rest were all the minority party. You know, Hitler had, I think it was 44% of the vote, and these other guys had 9%, giving the 53% required. And Franz von Papen was the, and they had 9 of the 11 ministries. And if you look at the writings between von Papen and the other aristocrats around the place, they say, "Don't worry, this Hitler will let him settle things down, and get the communists out of the way, and then we'll get rid of him, and he's but we can control him, and so on." I mean, that was obviously so. There are a series of misapprehensions that are factored into this. How did Hitler happen? If we stop the things that created Hitler, then we can stop totalitarianism from ever happening again, and then we have a paradise. Now, things that created Hitler were nationalism. They did not create Hitler. Hitler used that to create the social cohesion needed and the following, but that was not it. So national identity, that wasn't it. That's not the key thing. Hitler, the ballot box, like voting, so people could vote, and so that's not the issue. That wasn't the issue that created it. There were various other factors involved, going back to the Versailles Treaty at the end of World War I that impoverished and humiliated Germany. That was a key thing, as indeed was the Great Depression. That was also a key factor in creating sort of some of the more radical views. Not that there weren't other radicals around. It wasn't just the Nazis. There were plenty of communist radicals around as well. They didn't win though. The Nazis did. So there were a number of factors. The family and so on. The Nazis were very tolerant of religion, for example, or far more tolerant than any of the communist places were. Well, 100% tolerant, I don't think so, but tolerant nonetheless. Also, the German citizens had far more freedoms than the Soviet or communist citizens did. That you didn't need the travel papers or to anywhere near the same extent. You didn't have to have political commissars approving everything. Factory managers and owners of business could still make decisions, appoint who they wanted to, hire who they wanted to, unlike in the Soviet system where they couldn't do, the communist system, where they didn't have those sort of liberties. Political commissars were all over the place. So the Nazis had a lot, allowed the citizens to have a lot more freedoms. And also that the Nazis had imposed Nazism on the people. It wasn't imposed on them. It was something the people voted for and more or less went along with. And that's what scares the crap out of the Jews. They say, well, if people have the choice, they chose Hitler and Nazis, then that's the path to totalitarianism. The armed revolution of the communists, who cares? This is the thing we need to be frightened of more than anything. Now, I want to just talk about the the Jews see that the Jewish activists see that removing the rule of law, that is applying the law unevenly, is to restrain. So those that may be nationalistic, those that may identify with the country, those that may identify with the family or the religion, they should be suppressed. They should be. That's good. That's good, because you're not really suppressing people. What you're really doing is stopping Hitler. That's it. You're stopping Hitler. So it's a good thing when you apply the law unevenly. So it's a bit like the climate rebellion people. They're atomizing and dividing society, which is good, because a divided society can't form an identity. And if it can't form an identity, then it can't produce a Hitler. If it can't produce a Hitler, then it can never threaten the Jewish diaspora again. And this is it's infantile, the thinking. I'm staggered that people, and I've met a lot of Jews, worked with a lot of Jews that are, in my view, have towering intellects on why they would succumb to this. Is quite beyond me. But succumb to this type of thinking. So Hitler was, as they see it, the ultimate manifestation of threat to the Jews. So whatever forces created Hitler, they misread as saying, as thinking that any form of nationalism, any form of family, any religion, anything that produces group or national cohesion is automatically a device and mechanism to produce a Hitler. Therefore, if they remove all of that, then it's okay. Now, they therefore accept that the rule of law should no longer exist, that due legal process should no longer exist, that the will of the people as expressed through the ballot box, that should not exist, because all of these things lead to Hitler, and therefore by removing them, you're stopping Hitler. And this is the moral high ground they take when they go down this path. You've been with Tacitus today at your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.